Hey everybody, Scott Dust here. I'm a professor in management at Miami University Farmer School of Business, and I'm also the Chief Research Officer at Cloverleaf, an HR tech entity focused on offering coaching insights for everyone. And today, the topic of interest is the return to work. So this is top of mind for a lot of employees, employers, HR directors, or anybody in that people ops, human capital space. There's a lot of challenges embedded, but there's also a lot of opportunities, things that we should be aware of to potentially capitalize on how we might attract talent our way and ensure that we're prepared for the long haul when it comes to this major shift within the work environment. And so we're going to talk about those two subjects, the challenges as well as the opportunities, and then also offer some ideas, suggestions for ways to potentially investigate what's working, what's not working, how to get our arms around the preferences of employees, and then just talk about where technology is headed, some of the more interesting subjects that have started to surface and that whole concept as it relates to the future of work. So, number one, what is this challenge as it relates to the return to work? So, typically, not always, but in general, organizations or the organizational leaders, they seem to want, on average, more so than employees, to get people back into the office. And the reasons are multifaceted, but essentially they're concerned about team collaboration, maintaining culture, and having engaged employees. When they can't see employees, they don't really know what they're working on. They're not really sure if they're shirking. And they're also very much in tune with the fact that when we do have people in the same room and they're engaging with each other, you have more brainstorming and you can share ideas, and in the moment, then you can have more diversity of perspectives and more creativity and innovation. And that's fairly true, right? There is a lot of that is illustrated in the research that when you do have people face to face, there's a higher likelihood of that happening. But that's not impossible to recreate in a remote work environment. And employees, on the other hand, they're reporting that they feel way more productive as an individual, not necessarily team productivity or team effectiveness, but as an individual, they feel way more productive. So there's way less distractions. They're able to get more done on their own. They have the autonomy to set their schedule and work in whatever way is going to be best suited for them. They're also reporting that they feel higher in well-being when they have that optionality. And so when they're in charge of their schedule, and especially if they have domestic responsibilities, young children, etc., they can manipulate their work in ways that make sense given those circumstances. So there's the conflict, right? We seem to have a little bit of push and pull, and that's not always the case, right? There's some organizations that love the fact that they're cost savings and they're doubled down on the remote-only work environment. And they know that they can recruit anywhere and get talent from all over the world, which is also a perk. And then there's also employees that really want to go back to the office and they need that space, potentially because of their work-home situation and the resources and the circumstances that they have. So that tends to be the conflict. And I think what needs to happen is that everybody has to compromise and everybody has to understand the bigger picture. So organizations need to understand the bigger picture in that they need to think of talent retention as a long-term play. And if you want to win the war on talent, you have to make sure your employees are satisfied and want to work there for the long haul, or people are just going to learn whatever they can and move on to the next organization. On the other hand, employees really have to compromise and be willing to recognize that, hey, yeah, it is important to be productive as an individual, but we also can be better when we're working within a system and working closely with each other. Therefore, we need to somewhat recreate what we are potentially losing when we're not meeting face-to-face on a regular basis. So I've asked a lot of organizations this question: what are you doing? How are you trying to recreate what you were doing face-to-face in some type of virtual or hybrid work environment? Typically, they're doing three things, different cadence, different versions of this. But number one is that there's some kind of check-in meeting. A lot of times these are weekly stand-ups, and it just makes sure that everybody's on the same page. Maybe at Monday at 9 o'clock, a team of whatever it is, 7, hopefully no more than 20, get on a call, listen to whatever is top of mind, answer key questions, and move on, just to make sure we know exactly what everybody's working on. And those should all be virtual, right? Maybe some people are in the office, but they should have access to Zoom or Teams or whatever they're using, just like everybody else at home. And maybe the people in the office want to share a conference room with a speakerphone. Great. But these are all virtual. The next one is trying to create something that's a little bit less formal, something where personal connections can happen or people can support each other, but we can also talk about and celebrate some of the things that are happening. And so this is also kind of about alignment and having that check in with what's going on at the individual personal level, but also at the team and organization level. A lot of times these happen in some kind of like weekly lunch format. Well, we're all going to come together Wednesdays for lunch, do a midweek check-in, and see how things are going and have that opportunity to connect. And then the third one tends to be on-site or face-to-face, and it's some type of quarterly meeting that is very purposeful, very strategic. It's giving high-level overviews of OKRs. It's talking about here's the biggest challenges, here's the biggest rollouts, but it's also creating defined time for team building, team development, collaboration across departments, whatever it might be. So organizations may have already been investing in this type of thing, but even organizations that had never brought people in for these type of what they might call offsite sessions before are starting to invest in this and come up with creative ways to get everybody together. And the theory is, well, if they're not doing it face to face and we're worried about what we're going to be missing, why not just have everybody spend one big day doing it? Maybe it's quarterly, maybe it's only annually. It just kind of depends on the organization and what their priorities are. And so there are ways to create this trade-off and compromise in ways that everybody's happy, right? Organizations still create this sense of team collaboration. Employees still get that flexibility to work where they need to work in order to get things done. So now, second, opportunities of return to work. And we hinted at this a little bit in recognizing that, hey, employees really want to be able to have more flexibility. And so what I like to go with this is framing where this fits within this idea of the Great Resignation and organizational commitment. And so the Great Resignation essentially is two different trends. Number one, the quit rate is awfully high, even though we have a lot of job openings available. And there's also survey trends. So that's the more economic side. But more on the survey psychological side, you're also seeing a lot of people saying they just really want to have meaning and impact in the work that they do. And they're tending to reevaluate what exactly it is that they do. And so both of these are creating this great resignation situation, and employers and specifically people ops and human capital interested folks are saying, what do I do? What's going on? So one way to think of this is recognizing that there's three different types of commitment. The first one is normative commitment. And so I think organizations are only looking at a snapshot. There was a huge dip in the quit rate right when the pandemic hit. Makes sense because people are worried about what's going to happen and is the business still going to be around. And so there's a lot of pent up demand for the people that would have already been essentially job hopping and looking for the next opportunity anyway. Now they finally can do it after 18 months or 2 years of sitting tight. Also, if you really kind of zoom out, you can look at the 10-year perspective. And even though we have now this huge jump in the quit rate because it went way down, it's way back up, it actually is pretty much in line with the trends that we've been seeing over the last 10 years. And what this is signaling is essentially that normative commitment, or the extent to which you feel socially obligated to stay with your organization, is relatively extinct. And it has been extinct probably for the last 5-10 years, if not more. The number of organizations that employees will work for, I think estimated at now 12, may have been way fewer 50, 60 years ago or whatever. So don't worry about normative commitment. Next one, continuance commitment. This is really about a cost-benefit analysis. This is about compensation. This is about benefits, all those types of factors. Yes, those are important, but most of the time research right now is illustrating that people aren't so worried in terms of the Great Resignation and whether or not they're going to look and turn over, etc. They're not so worried about continuance commitment. Right now, people just want to be paid fairly. Unless it's a substantial change in their compensation, they're probably not going to make that big change. A lot of times people are way more interested in the third factor, which is affective commitment. This is our emotional attachment to an organization. And this is strongly connected to this return to work option. People care about the extent to which they feel emotionally attached to the people they work with, the job that they do, the culture of the organization, and those things all revolve around, hey, do you care about my well-being? Do you care about the extent to which I'm able to have a work-family balance? Do you care about the fact that I can be productive, but at the same time have a break? So all of these things, we're seeing a huge spike in people being more interested in, and arguably they've always been interested in it, but for some reason, given the circumstances of the pandemic and all the changes it had psychologically and economically, all that effective commitment consideration is going through the roof. So that's how you win the talent war. That's what you should be focusing on to try and make sure that you're retaining the best people, attracting the best people, and trying to focus on those emotional elements. The third item is thinking about what should we be testing for, investigating, evaluating with this whole return to work. This is not a one and done type scenario where you can just ask employees, hey, what are your preferences? Do you want virtual? Do you want hybrid? Do you want face-to-face? Okay, we'll consider it. We'll make a decision and then we're done. If you're doing that, more than likely you're overlooking a lot of key information. And a lot of times organizations are asking those questions, but they're not necessarily listening to what the employees want. They're just kind of deciding whether or not they're going to compromise at a certain type of hybrid organization. So here's the things that organizations should be doing. Number one, start thinking in terms of employee profiles. So what do we mean by that? Well, everybody is unique, but at the same time, you can start to group people based upon a variety of unique factors that become relatively similar. So think of it in terms of marketing and even in politics. In marketing, companies know what that key persona is for the type of people that are likely to buy their product or service. Similar in politics. Everybody within a certain political party knows these are the types of voters I need to focus on in terms of my policies. There might be 3 to 5 to 10 different types of profiles. Same happens within organizations when you start thinking about why do people want what they want. So my profile, for example, dual income earner household, both of our jobs in professional services, young children under the age of 18 that live in the house still, and we have a far commute to both of our employers, around 45 minutes to an hour. So that right there is my profile, and I have arguably relatively similar people within my work setting that have somewhat similar profiles, and we all have a reason for what we want in terms of a work location arrangement. Most of us want, for example, to have the option to go on site given the circumstances that might be happening at any certain day, given the meetings we have, the challenges with workspace at home or whatever it might be. But at the same time, you want the flexibility to be able to work remotely as needed. So think about profiles. Really start to think about the trends within the individuals that are within your organization to get a better feel for what's the right thing to do. Another thing is start focusing on longitudinal surveys. So pulse people on a regular basis, perhaps quarterly, to get a feel for are the key dependent variables or outcomes of interest going up or down based upon what we've decided to do for our work location arrangement. So things like collaboration, engagement, productivity, effort, stress, well-being, inclusion, you name it, whatever is important to you, whatever the key considerations, the things that you're worried about, and that list seems to be probably the top priorities from those people I'm talking to. Sample those on a regular basis. Another consideration, start using what's called experience sampling methodology, which you do shorter surveys and you only need a smaller sample. You might not need to do it to hundreds and hundreds of employees, but to try and get a relatively representative sample from all these different profiles and pulse them 2 to 3 times a day and ask them, what's the configuration of you and your group that day, right? Where are you working and why? Where are your team members working? And then also evaluate how that day went. Were you able to collaborate? Were you able to get the information you need? Did you engage in psychological safety? Did you feel productive? Did you feel stressed out? And having that more micro level intervention information will enable you to have better conclusions going forward. Another thing to consider is the timing of everything. More than likely, this change is going to take some time for everybody to settle. So if you're pulsing people and trying to get a feel for how they're doing and why they're doing it, you need to make sure that you give people enough time to get into the groove of what they're doing. People are starting to survey on day one when people return to the office, and that's going to be problematic. Typically what you want is this 2-week threshold where you give people approximately 2 weeks to get settled. And then after that, you might want to survey what they're doing for approximately 2 weeks to get a good feel for how they're doing within that certain time frame. So pay attention to the timing of the surveys. Okay, the fourth topic, technology and the future of work. So some really interesting things are happening right now. For example, Zoom came up with Zoom apps. I don't know, they used to call it Zaps. And essentially what they're trying to do is get people to stay within their Zoom rooms longer and for more reasons. And so by integrating with all of the other applications that we have, no matter if it's some kind of Trello board or if it's some kind of collaboration tool, and even things like more fun team building, team development type things like games to get people interacting and working together, maybe going back to those like weekly lunch informal meetings. So there's been a lot of trends recently where people are developing new interesting tools within our Zoom platform or Microsoft Teams or whatever else it is to try and make sure that people can replicate some of the things that they were doing within the office. So make sure that if there's things that were going on in the office, pinpoint those things that you know you're missing. The dry erase board sessions, the water cooler get together, whatever it might be. And be creative and look at some of those options that are out there to see if there are ways that we can recreate what we were doing. Another interesting trend that is probably, years in, years out, is the potential to use virtual reality and starting to see how we can increase, in the social sciences we call the richness of communication, by using some type of virtual means. And right now, I would say it's pretty expensive technology. People might have to buy glasses or headsets that are anywhere from $200 to $1,000 a piece. Downloading an application, sometimes it costs a subscription, sometimes it's free, that enable people to see each other as if they're in virtual reality. And so what you're going to see is a lot of organizations, and a lot of them are doing it, whether it's Google Glasses and a few other startups that are out there trying to replicate this technology, is try and increase the richness of the communication to the greatest extent possible so that it almost replicates what it's like to engage in a face-to-face environment. And so formally, before there was a lot of investment in video technology, some people used it, but it wasn't perhaps as reliable. It wasn't as easy to set up. It wasn't mainstream. It certainly is mainstream now. And so you're constantly going to see people trying to up the ante as it comes to figuring out new creative ways to make that experience even more replicating what it was when we were face to face. So pay attention to the trends, pay attention to what's out there. I would say over time, it won't be as cost prohibitive as what it is now. But there are options that are out there in terms of trying to increase the richness so that we can pick up on those subtle cues. We can interact with the people in even more real time and have a bigger picture of what they're doing. I think a lot of people are very worried right now that people are multitasking, maybe not paying full attention, things like that. So over time, those things might become less and less of a problem. So that's it. Challenges of returning to work, opportunities of returning to work. How do you investigate what's working and what's not with the return to work, and the future of return to work as it relates to technology? So thank you and good luck.